Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Monday, June 10th, 2024. Our dear friend Anya Parampil joins us now. Anya, a pleasure. Thank you very much for being here. You have some very interesting ideas about the equation between NATO and Israel, and it has to do with Nazism. But before we get to that, some other questions about breaking news. Is the slaughter of 260 civilians in order to rescue 4 hostage civilians a war crime?
It seems that every day in this war, we are asking this question: did Israel's conduct an X operation or bombing raid violate international law? And I think the answer is yes, if international law applied to Israel. But if there's anything we've learned throughout this war, it's that it doesn't. And in a lot of ways, it seems this international order, this post-war World War II rules-based order, was established to protect Israel. It certainly led to the establishment of Israel in 1948. So what's remarkable to me about this latest attack that Israel carried out to rescue these hostages is that as an American, I'm incredibly concerned that the so-called humanitarian aid pier that was established south near Rafah in order to ostensibly bring much needed humanitarian aid and food assistance into the besieged strip, that the role that this aid pier actually played in the raid. According to witnesses in Rafah, the Israelis actually conducted this operation by hiding in aid trucks. There's one man who said an aid truck, a humanitarian aid truck, pulled up and people rushed it thinking finally they were getting food and medicine, things that they're in desperate need of as people die just out of desperation every day in Gaza. And instead, an Israeli soldier came out and shot him 3 times. This was a testimony delivered by a man in a hospital bed saying that, yes, the Israelis hid within this humanitarian aid. This is a technique the United States has used before. Elliot Abrams, during the Iran-Contra affair, actually used humanitarian aid shipments to transfer weapons to the Contra militias in Nicaragua in the 1980s. So this is and there are other statements I've seen from witnesses as well claiming that American special operations soldiers were present for this raid. So if I'm an American and I'm hearing that right now in Washington, D.C., I would be calling for, if I'm in the government, an investigation or some sort of transparency into the U.S. role here, because, again, this war is simply marching us closer into a direct confrontation with resistance forces in the region, U.S. troops participating in something as brutal and horrific as this raid, in which Israel actually killed some of its own hostages, apparently, as well. It's a very bad mark on us. And it really paints this humanitarian pier, which was, I guess, something that Antony Blinken came up with in order to make it look like the Biden administration was doing something human for once, that this pier is actually being used as part of the war on Gaza, that it's not a humanitarian pier, that it's a weapon of war. And I think Jake Sullivan and Antony Blinken, who actually praised this operation before any information about who died came out, who praised the success of the operation, need to answer for this. I would be calling for them to testify in front of Congress, in front of the people right now if I were on the Hill. But unfortunately, I don't think we have anybody willing to do that at this moment.
No, we don't. We don't, because of the war party. Normally, the Democrats control the Senate. You'd expect nothing from them. The Republicans control the House. You'd expect them to be going after a Democratic administration that did this. But the war party controls about 98%. You got Thomas Massey in the House and some of the progressives, and Bernie Sanders in the Senate, and once in a while Rand Paul and Mike Lee, and that's it. We have 2 sources that say that American special forces were involved. I wonder if they landed on the pier. I don't know how else they got there, but they probably came in via helicopters. You know what special forces do? They're armed and they kill, and they move with great speed and lethality.
There is footage of a
I
helicopter.
don't remember the Congress declaring war on Gaza. Do you?
No, but when was the last time we declared war, period? I mean, that's why I know so many people working in DC to actually bring up the War Powers Resolution and force Congress to vote on all of these covert wars that we're waging across the Middle East and
Doesn't
Africa
happen.
and elsewhere. It never happens because, as you say, this is a bipartisan issue. And as Thomas Massey was brave enough to tell Tucker on his podcast last week, every member of Congress, or at least he was speaking for the Republican Party, has their own special APAC handler, a constituent from their district who actually counsels them on what they can and cannot say or do as representatives of the American people. So I think we need to have some sort of therapy session as a country to talk about what is going on here and how do we change this? How do we actually take our country back? That's something that I would really like to know, because it's shocking to me that we can witness something as severe as this war. I mean, this is just one example. This latest massacre where they hide in humanitarian aid trucks to kill people is just the latest example of Israeli brutality that we've all been forced to witness on a live stream for the last 8 months. And there is video online of a helicopter leaving from a space that looks very close to the pier. Blinken and Sullivan are claiming that they didn't use the pier, that it was just south of the pier, but it was south by several meters, if anything. So it's hard to imagine how a helicopter would get in to Rafah or the area without at least the United States clearing the air and providing air support or backup. So it's just we don't have a forum really for making our officials actually answer these questions. Nobody in the media is forcing them to ask these questions. It's frightening.
I mean, originally the government revealed that American intelligence sources, either CIA or DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, helped them. And then, of course, because Gazans have cell phones like the rest of us, it leaked out that those guys are Americans and they're in uniform and they got guns in their hands. Who the hell are they? So I haven't heard anything from the government, but just from two sources that communicate with Judging Freedom, that special forces were on the ground. Whether they killed anybody, we don't know. Whether they took fire, we don't know. The Benny Gantz resignation, is this significant for Israeli politics, or would Gantz versus Netanyahu be just Tweedledee and Tweedledum?
Well, I appreciate the Alice in Wonderland reference, because my daughter is actually obsessed with watching Alice in Wonderland almost every day now. And yeah, Tweedledee and Tweedledum are a pretty good picture of politicians across the board, whether it's here in the United States, we have Tweedledee and Tweedledum, or all throughout Europe, and of course in Israel. I think that there are elements within the US administration, particularly the liberal side, Biden, that would like to see Netanyahu go, because they can blame all of this on him and have Gantz step in. I watched the Sunday shows yesterday and definitely got the vibe that the hope of U.S. officials, including Senator Chris Coons, and I mean, it was across the spectrum. You had Chris Coons from Delaware campaigning for Biden, and Lindsey Graham, the neocon war hawk from South Carolina, both saying that they like Benny Gantz and that his resignation is sending a message that Netanyahu's unstable. But I think from the American perspective, that is wish casting or hopeful in a way, because Netanyahu has the support of the Israeli population. Gantz, of course, wasn't actually a major player in the political coalition that Netanyahu relies on in order to keep his place. So I don't actually believe that Netanyahu is in as much trouble politically in Israel as some here would like to think. And that's because, as I've argued many times on this show, he is a special link between the United States and Israel, and also between the competing forces within Israel that is holding it together. And one of the voices that I respect the most on Israel, Miko Piled, he's an Israeli whose father was actually a founding member of Israel, a general that fought all of the major wars and became slightly critical of Israel in his later years. I was talking to Miko recently and asked him what he thinks about Netanyahu. And Miko is very well known in Palestine and in the US as a leading peace activist, someone who would like to see peace and justice in Palestine, and he said he believes Netanyahu will die prime minister. And I kind of feel the same way. The question of how long that means he has, there's a lot of competing factions going on in Israel and the U.S. that would like him out of the picture. So he's definitely in hot water, but it would take a lot to actually remove him from office.
And Gantz has blood on his hands from events over that he supervised long before October 7th, from his years as the chief of staff of the IDF and as defense minister. I think that this odd concatenation of Lindsey Graham and Chris Coons, like Gantz, they just prefer his personality to Bibi's personality. But you have 79-80% of the Israeli public supporting the slaughter in Gaza. It almost doesn't matter who the prime minister is. If that person wants to stay in office, they're going to do what they think the public wants, as horrific as it is.
Yeah, and it is about personality, as you say. It's kind of like how a lot of Americans clutched their pearls over Trump when he was in office because he didn't like the things that he says, because in some ways he ripped the mask off the United States by speaking honestly. We want to take their oil, things like that. That's kind of the role Netanyahu plays in Israel, which scares some people, because when he speaks openly about wanting to eradicate the Amalek, it's kind of like he's accidentally vocalized their genocidal plan. And some people don't like that. They'd much rather have a gentleman who can hide behind a nice face and not speak so much evil while carrying out the same kind of crimes that Gantz, as you accurately state, has a long record of supporting and conducting himself.
Did Tucker Carlson ask Congressman Massey if he plans to be on the House floor when Prime Minister Netanyahu speaks next month?
I actually didn't see whether or not he asked him that, and it is an interesting question. I think if you're a member of Congress and a foreign leader is coming to speak, it doesn't really do much to protest them, because you're not really changing anything, and you're supposed to be a professional representative of your country. Israel, you could maybe make the case, is a little bit different. I personally believe that Israel is a pariah state, that you can't equate it to other states, and so if you want to if there was like a willing coalition of bipartisan senators and Congress people that were willing to boycott his speech, that maybe could be quite a strong statement. But when you have progressive members of Congress boycotting the Indian prime minister when he shows up, and a leader of a very powerful country such as India, then it kind of takes away the statement when they come and when Bernie says he's going to protest Israel. It's kind of like, oh, well, if you're just doing that for everybody you don't like, it kind of takes out the steam.
Yeah, so far it's just Bernie Sanders. I'm going to be on a radio show with Congressman Massey, who is a longtime friend of mine.
Oh, great.
When Pope Francis addressed the Congress, this Methodist congressman from Kentucky gave me his ticket. And there I was facing the Pope, making eye contact. And in the bleachers behind the Pope was the governor of New Jersey, Chris Christie. He's looking at me and mouthing, "How did you get that seat?" From Thomas Massey. Is there still a secular left in Israel?
My husband would be the expert to ask, because he knows those people well. I think, based on my conversations with him and what I know about Israel, is that secular left has been beaten down. I mean, they're like other than Palestinians, the lowest rung in Israeli society. They're violently beaten down by the state whenever they come into the streets. And then certainly the irony of all of this is that the protest against Netanyahu in some of throughout this war is that he actually hasn't done enough to free the hostages or satisfy the bloodlust in Israeli society. So if there is a secular left remaining in Israel, I think this war has taken any remaining life out of them. I mean, it's not a fun place to be secular or left.
In a recent, I don't remember where I read it, because I read everything you put out there. I think it was a tweet. You recently equated NATO and Israel and the common point was Nazism. Did I get that correctly? And if so, would you explain, please? You know how much I think of your intellect and your courage. This one I'm dying to hear.
So this is a tricky one to unpack because there are a couple of ways you could interpret it. There's just the obvious way, which is, well, after World War II, it's well known through Operation Paperclip that Nazis were rehabilitated and absorbed in the U.S. government, namely to establish NASA. And I think that's a chapter in history that we should revisit because I don't totally understand it myself. And I don't think there's been a lot of discussion as to why that happened. But that's not really the case that I was making. What I was thinking when I put that tweet out there is that I was watching the D-Day celebration, watching Biden turning around away from the cameras next to Macron, a lifetime banker, and that's basically the only mark on his resume that got him into the French presidency. And looking at these two celebrating the defeat of fascism and kind of scratching my head because it's 2024 and it feels to me as if fascism is alive and well. And because Nazi Germany was defeated in World War II, that term Nazi kind of became the label that we use for anything that is fascist. But in reality, the fascist ideology that we are taught, the Nazis was the heart of the Nazi party, is today I see it playing out in Israel, where there is a government that has declared that its ethno-religious ideology gives it the right to eradicate an entire population of people, other human beings living in Gaza. So I see a direct line between Zionist ideology and what we are told about Nazi ideology. Not to mention the fact that on the other side of this war in Europe, we have actual Nazi brigades fighting in the Ukrainian military alongside conscripted Ukrainian soldiers that are forced to fight, dragged into buses and into vans and forced to fight a Russian menace. And the Russians were apparently our allies in World War II. So why are we now still fighting them? And you have Macron standing there before the world celebrating the end of fascism, while just weeks ago he was saying he's willing to commit French troops to go die in this war against Russia. How many Ukrainian civilians, Ukrainian conscripted soldiers, how many Russian soldiers have died in this war? How many Palestinians have died over the past 8 months? At what point do we step back and say that the same forces that we allegedly defeated, or this evil that we defeated during World War II, is still staring us straight in the face? Not to mention the fact that since the end of World War II, when this new international order, whether it's the financial order in the IMF and the World Bank or the political order established through the United Nations, that actually resulted in a very violent decades of war. Immediately in Korea, there was a UN-US campaign to force Korea into this world order, this financial world order, that resulted in the deaths of 20% of the Korean population, the destruction of their entire infrastructure. I've been to Korea and spoken with people still reeling from the effects of that war in the 50s. That came right after the so-called defeat of fascism. What about Cambodia? What about Vietnam? It seems that there was actually a fascist march to continue to push people around the world to participate in a global financial economy based in Europe and the United States by any means necessary, mostly through death. That's the world that we've lived in since World War II. So I just feel like in 2024, I was kind of over this celebration of the defeat of fascism, because if that was the defeat of fascism, then I'm not sure what we ended up with is honestly that much better. And I'm speaking as an American as well, because there's a lot of talk about Americans having won World War II, but that's not really how I feel. I feel that we got nice perks for a while in terms of the economy, but ultimately what we're left with in 2024 is an economy based on death. Our economy cannot function without these wars, without printing money to buy weapons and then sell them to our friends or subsidize them to our allies. And then such as in Ukraine or Israel. And we have, members of Congress crying because they can't get weapons passed, saying that their constituents won't be able to pay for daycare if these funding bills for weapons don't go through. I mean, what kind of economy and world is that? The reality is Americans have suffered under this. We've provided the tax money. We've provided the boys and girls that have fought in these wars for decades. So I'm just tired of hearing that we won, to be honest. That was my statement.
Well, this is a very courageous and tantalizing argument. Let me just ask you a few questions. Just as there are different degrees of libertarianism or conservative republicanism, are there different degrees of Zionism? Are all Zionists in favor of the slaughter of Palestinians?
If they don't, if they're identifying as a Zionist and they believe in the Zionist project and the state of Israel, then they're only lying if they don't say that they support the killing of Palestinians, because there's no alternative. There's no way for Israel to exist. It is based on death. From the moment it was founded, it was based on exactly what we're seeing play out now in 2024. We just can see it more clearly now. But even before Israel was established in 1948, there was a violent campaign led by Jewish terrorists to take that territory. And then eventually the UN just came in and moved them out by force, moved the Palestinians out by force and established Israel. And it's been one war after the other. So Jewish people who are different than Zionists, who don't identify as Jewish supremacists, which is what Zionism is. It's a form of ethno-supremacy like any other, just like Nazism.
Right.
And people who, if they're going to identify with Zionism and the Zionist project, there really is no gray zone. You have to be in support of the killing of children and the cleansing of Gaza.
Does the I'm going to transfer over to Ukraine now. Does the West think that we are morally superior to the Russians? I mean, I'm asking you to analyze somebody like Victoria Nuland or Lindsey Graham. I'm going to play a tape from Senator Graham that'll make your hair curl. But do you think that they think that we are superior to the Russians, just as the Nazis think they're superior and the Jews think, and the Zionists, the Zionists think they're superior?
Well, they're different people that play different roles in this scheme. So Lindsey Graham, I think he's out there for a paycheck and to be in Congress forever and have a safe district or a safe state where he basically acts like a king. Victoria Nuland, she's a bit more of an ideologue who comes from a historic background with ties to the region from her family that were always actively participating in a confrontation really with Russia. And Blinken is the same. Antony Blinken, our Secretary of State, is the same. And the whole neocon project that is somehow allied now within the Democratic Party is for some reason obsessed with taking out Russia as a power or
right.
demonizing it. But no, I don't think that they believe their own script in that regard. Lindsey Graham might believe that he's tricked himself into believing this because it's the only way he sleeps at night. But I think certain more ideological factions within the government, this is all just about an obsessive crusade against Russia. And it's dark.
Here's Senator Graham yesterday. The questioner begins by asking him about comments made by Senator Tuberville of Alabama, who on Ukraine agrees with us, not on everything, but on Ukraine. And Congressman or Senator Graham's response is over the top. Cut number 7, Chris.
Your Republican colleague, Senator Tommy Tuberville, just this past week said on Steve Bannon's show that Volodymyr Zelensky is a dictator and unconstitutional. And he said this about Vladimir Putin.
He doesn't want Ukraine. He doesn't want Europe. Hell, he's got enough land of his own. He just wants to make sure that he does not have United States weapons in Ukraine pointing at Moscow.
Those echo some Russian talking points, Senator. I wonder if those remarks from your fellow senator represent the GOP.
No, it represents him and him alone. If you spend 15 minutes studying Putin and what he wants, He wants to recreate the Russian Empire. He's not going to stop in Ukraine. We celebrated the 80th anniversary of D-Day. It was a failure. It was the unnecessary war described by Winston Churchill. We had a dozen chances to stop Hitler. It's not about NATO, it's not about American weapons in Ukraine. It's about a megalomaniac wanting to create the Russian Empire by force of arms. If you don't stop him, there goes Taiwan. So we've been slow as hell of helping Ukraine, but Senator Tuberville's analysis really misses what Putin's all about. He's an outlier, I think, in the Republican Party. I like him personally.
What do you think? Never met a war he didn't want somebody else to fight.
I watched that interview live yesterday, and I was shocked by just, it's almost as if Lindsey Graham lives in on another planet, because even the way he was talking about Palestine or in Israel in that interview, he's saying, oh yeah, we're just going to bring in the Saudis and the UAE and negotiate a day after plan for Gaza, no problem, as if the Palestinians and the rest of the region don't exist. And I think more and more he's going to have to confront the reality that those other forces do exist, and they're not just taking orders from Washington and London anymore. In fact, the Saudis might not even be taking orders from London and Washington anymore. But on that point of Ukraine, in that same interview, the one thing I'll give Lindsey Graham credit for is that he was incredibly honest. He said the reason that we need to continue to fight this war against Russia and Ukraine, even though it seems as though we've lost, is that Ukraine is home to trillions of dollars worth of critical minerals that we need for future development, and that we can't let those minerals and all of that wealth go to Russia and China, which is apparently what would happen if Ukraine were just allowed to be a sovereign country. But so that's why there needs to be this war to, I mean, it's crude, but they've pretty much wiped out the Ukrainian population, wiped out Ukrainian infrastructure and civilian life, so that BlackRock and transatlantic capital can come in there and rebuild the country the way that it would like it to exist. And I guess we're going to get Ukraine's minerals in the meantime, if you believe this war is even winnable and that Lindsey Graham's fantasy is going to play out, which I don't. I think we did all of it for nothing in the end, because I don't think we're going to end up with any of that.
Lindsey Graham supports the Nazis in Kyiv and the Nazis in Tel Aviv.
Exactly. And he does so just nakedly. He said that he was just in Israel and that he spent so much time with Netanyahu and that he's looking forward to him coming to speak to Congress on July 24th, but that he's very disappointed we haven't given Israel enough weapons to finish the job and eradicate Hamas. And so that he said he got his little wish list from Netanyahu and he was going to come back to DC and let his colleagues know what the Nazis in Tel Aviv want. And that's the reality we're living under, Judge. And so I think more and more people have woken up to this reality. And I think the fact that Congressman Massey speaking openly about it on a program or a platform given to him by Tucker Carlson speaks volumes to the point or to the where we are in history. And so Americans are realizing the truth. I think we're waking up. And so I hope that it actually results in some sort of change at some point, because otherwise I'm going to drive myself crazy. And I think you are too.
You have more hope than I do. Senator Tuberville will be here tomorrow to challenge Senator Graham. Senator Graham's not coming on the show. I can't imagine he would come even if we wanted him, but Senator Tuberville wants to come on.
Great.
To respond to it. Thank you very much, Anya. So articulate and so charming and so much appreciated by the audience and by me. I may take some of your words and run them past that red bearded one when he's on with us, I think, on Thursday afternoon.
Oh, I'll look forward to that. I'll definitely be watching.
Thank you. All the best.
Take care, Judge.
Of course. And coming up she's just marvelous. And we're very fortunate that she's a regular with us, and she and her husband and their colleague, Aaron Matei, are my dear friends. Coming up at 4 o'clock this afternoon, another dear friend, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.